All right, good morning from Japan. And now we have a flood of questions to look at. These are the questions that Vidura is going to ask. After hearing why consciousness would be interested in existing within temporary situations such as this. After hearing that, these are the questions that he says. He asks, you explained that all external things evolve from Mahatattva, the great totality, which is the amalgam of individual consciousness. The great totality evolves into individual elements, which the Supreme enters to facilitate their combinations. Thus he becomes the cosmic soul animating and developing a fetus that forms the prototype for all the thousands of life forms with 10 vitalities, 3 self-concepts, and many sensory abilities to enjoy many sense objects. So that's his summary, right? He's putting the conversation back on track. That's the summary of what happened. Maitreya has explained that external things evolve from something called a Mahat, this principle called Mahat, the great totality, and that thing is a non-individuated conduit of consciousness, and then that evolves eventually into the individual elements, and then the Supreme enters into those elements to get them to form into combinations of things that can become a life form, and they become a prototype life form, which is the basis for all other life forms. Then, now here comes his questions. How do the various life forms with their unique talents actually evolve from this prototype combination of the fundamental natural elements? So he wants to know some detail. You just told me in general that all the life forms that ever exist come from this prototype life form, come from the blueprint of this prototype life form. Or how? How do they actually evolve? So you see, the Bhagavatam treats it differently, treats design and evolution differently. The design of the life forms is accomplished in one phase, and then the implementation of the design is accomplished in another phase. What families then spread throughout creation, with children, grandchildren, and forefathers stretching back all the way to the forefather of all forefathers, Brahma. So he wants to know how do life forms evolve in their species, in their genus, in their family. What are the lineages that go all the way back to this first being, Brahma? What things did they create and what resulted? Who were the Manus ruling the epochs? What realms exist above and below the earth? He wants to know where some of these guys dwell. Not all of them dwell on earth. So what realms exist besides earth? What are those realms like, and what is life like there? What are the different realms on earth? What are the different types of animals? So now he wants to know about life on earth as well in detail. What are the different realms on earth? What are the different kinds of animals, humans, gods, reptiles, birds, born from wombs, eggs, seeds, or by self-division? So that sums up his questions about the types of beings that exist in the universe. And he has other questions. What avatar come into the world to control the powers behind generation, maintenance, and destruction? What are the wonderful deeds of the avatar of Lakshmi's lover? Now he wants to know about basically in the next section he wants to ask about wise people and unwise people, what they do and what they get from those actions. So he says, what are the physical features, conduct, and characteristics indicative of different spiritual and material lifestyles? Spiritual and material lifestyles is varnashram. So he wants to know, you can categorize human beings into varnas and ashrams. Varnas is like occupational types, and ashram is like stages of life. So he wants to know, how do you characterize those? What are the physically, by conduct, and by character? What are the physical features, conduct, and characteristics of the different stages of life and occupational categories? How are the sages born, and what do they do? How did they accumulate knowledge and organize it? What knowledge did they accumulate regarding rituals, yoga, renunciation, science, and techniques of remembering the all-attractive? What kinds of ignorance do the fools propound? What sorts of confused children do they raise? What destinations do living beings attain by their different deeds and natures? I don't know if you remember the 10 topics of a Purana. Remember we had that a while ago, 10 topics that are covered in a Purana. These are Vidura's questions are hitting on all the 10 topics. What conduct generates pleasure, wealth, morality, and liberation? So you might recognize those 4 terms: pleasure, wealth, morality, liberation. Anybody know what those 4 are? Those are the 4 purusharthas. Pleasure is kama, wealth is artha, morality is dharma, and liberation is moksha. So Vidura wants to know what kind of conduct, what kind of activity or karma will give me kama, what kind of karma will give me artha, what kind of karma will give me dharma, what kind of karma will give me moksha, what kind of activity will give me pleasure, what kind of activity will give me money, what kind of activity will give me morality, integrity, what kind of what activity will give me freedom, liberation. So that's good. Good thing you asked those questions, because we all want to know that, right? Remember, Maitreya is not going to be like, well, you only paid me enough money for me to answer you 2 of these questions. Maitreya is going to ask you all, is going to answer all these questions. So if you follow the conversation that's going to ensue, you're going to get the answers to all these questions. Prakriti wants to know if this mentions the 5th Purushartha. That's what the Bhagavatam is all about, the 5th Purushartha. What laws exist for conducting business? These are side questions. The main topic of Bhagavatam is the 5th Purushartha, which is love. So Vidura's questions continue. He wants to know about laws. What laws exist for conducting business? Interesting question. And what punishments are recommended? How it's not just for business, but business also means for activities, going about your daily life, your vritti. How are the dead cared for? How are the ancestral deities generated? How do the planets, constellations, and other stars indicate time by their positions? Oh my God, what subject is that? Wait a minute. Let me read it to you again. How do the planets, constellations, and other stars indicate time by their positions? What subject is that? It's astrology. Oh my God, the Puranas are about astrology too. Yes, they are. Because it's very important for you to figure out, to know what time it is. Both in the simple sense of it's 3:45 p.m., and also in the sense of it's July 28th, and also in the sense of what is more than just those measures of the sun's, a solely measure of the sun's movement, but how the sun interacts with all the other planets. Says, oh, it's time to do this. It's time not to do that. It's time for this to happen. It's time that's not going to happen. So Maitreya is going to answer how the planets, constellations, and other stars indicate time by their position. Time means karma. Time means fate. Time means destiny. Kala. What is to gain by the effort to be charitable, austere, and helpful? So it's important to be charitable, austere, and helpful. Well, why? What do you get from it? Vidura wants to know. Yeah, Crystal wants to know if moksha is attainable. It's attainable within a moment. Actually, earlier, at the beginning of this book, remember it's a king who's going to die in 7 days, being enlightened by a sage named Shuka. And the king asks the sage, I only have 7 days. Is that enough? And Sukha says, it's more than enough. It's time. We have enough time. We can take this slow. We can do it thoroughly and systematically. Remember that. And then he said, remember this King Kadvanga? He did this in 1 moment. I think, or maybe he said 7 moments. You have 1 day. You have 7 days. So it's not, moksha is not something on a timer. It's just all about you and your consciousness. It happens to usually take a long time because we're usually reluctant to even grasp what it actually is. But it's not necessary for it to take a long time. Vidura, wait, more questions. How do our duties change when we are far from home or in unusual situations? Really interesting, right? How do the duties change when we are far from home or in unusual situations? And how can we satisfy the all-attractive who is everybody's joy and the mother of morality? He just happens to throw that question in there at the end, which is basically his main interest. Vidura paused for a moment, moved by emotion after asking this final question. He then said, you're among the greatest teachers. There must be questions I should have asked, but did not. So please also answer those. This is how teachers express great kindness to their inept followers, disciples, and children. Please speak about the destruction of the universe too, Vidura continued enthusiastically. What are the different ways the elements of nature dissolve their bonds? Who continues to exist during the destruction, and who falls into the deepest sleep? Please explain whatever a student should know about the transcendental forms of the Supreme Person and the individual beings. I ask so many questions. So Maitreya maybe was looking at him like, going to stop soon? So I could start answering some questions. And then Vidura says, I ask so many questions because it is well known that pure sages are the source of knowledge. I know it is certainly impossible to gain knowledge, detachment, or divine love on my own. Contrary to the American value that you could do everything all by yourself. The most important person in the whole wide world is you, and you hardly even know you. Sesame Street. The American way. It's you, and you're the most important, and that's all you ever need. And contrary to that value, Vidura says it's well known that sages are the source of knowledge. On my own, it's impossible for me to get knowledge or what it grants. Knowledge grants both detachment and attachment. Knowledge grants detachment from what is useless and attachment to what is useful. So it grants dispassion and passion. Knowledge grants passion or love for the supreme, and it grants dispassion or vairagya from the inferior. But without the Veda and the sage who understands the Veda, you can't get it. So he says, that's why I'm asking so many questions, because this is such a rare opportunity. I'm asking these questions because I want to hear about the deeds of Hari. I am ignorant and blinded. Out of pity for me, please answer my questions. All the Vedas, sacrifices, austerities, and charity cannot measure up to the value of even 1 word of your answers, which liberate all living beings from fear. Why did he bother to say that? Because Maitreya might think, well, just read the Vedas. Or some people might think, you don't need a teacher. You got the book. It's just the most important person in the whole wide world is you and your book. You don't need to ask somebody questions. Just read the book. So Vidura says, actually, all of the Vedas and all of the techniques that the Vedas give for sacrifices, austerities, and charity are not even as valuable as 1 word from your answers. Why? Because it's like if you're a little baby bird and you try to eat a worm, you'll get sick and die because you can't digest it yet. But when your mom feeds you the worm after she digested it, then you get healthy and strong and you grow up. So when you don't know anything, then it's impossible to access the instruction manual. You don't even know a language, Like a 4-year-old kid can't read an instruction manual, even for how to play with their own simple toy. They need the parent to read the manual to them. Then when they learn, then later they can get directly benefit from it. So the same way, you need somebody that already understands the thing that you're trying to, that you don't know anything about, to give you access to it. Later, as you develop, then you can also explore it on your own. And that's the end of the chapter. That's the end of Vidura's questions. And it's only 15 minutes, so you want to ask questions, or do you want to go to the next chapter? Up to you, my good peoples. I hate that there's a delay. It's the weirdest thing. You guys might not know this, but there's like 5 to 10 second delay from when I say something to when you hear it. And then, of course, there's like a delay of some seconds before you respond. So I always feel like I say something and then there's like hot air. So now we got Miss Vinay to say next chapter. And since next chapter, all right, great. Next chapter, let's do it. It's really kind of hard to ask questions about questions. So let's do it. The next chapter is fantastic. It's one of my favorite chapters in the whole Bhagavatam. The reason is that this is going to describe Brahma and his birth and his beginning in the kind of detail that you really want. You already know that Brahma was born in the middle of nothing and got confused and then did some kind of, tried to calm himself down, and then he got some awareness inside his heart and he got a connection to Vishnu through that, and then got enlightened by Vishnu. You already know that, but you don't know the details, and the details are so interesting. So all you heard so far was Shuka's summary of this. Now you're going to hear the source material where Maitreya explains it to Vidura. So the name of this chapter is Brahma's Awakening. And so that's where, how does Maitreya start to answer all these questions? Well, he just starts he rewinds the tape all the way to the beginning. He says, all right, let's tackle the description of the universe. You wanted to know how all these things evolve from Brahma? Let's go. Let's go back to square one and talk about where Brahma starts. So when Maitreya, the greatest sage and knower of the Purana, was asked all these questions by Vidura, the greatest of the Kurus, his enthusiasm leapt at the opportunity, because it was an opportunity to speak about the all-attractive. He smiled broadly. I could just imagine him smiling broadly, and joyfully exclaimed, your family is truly worthy of the saints' respect. Now, all the saints, why does he say this? Because the Kurus have tremendous respect from the sadhus, from the saints and sages. And some of them might wonder, some of the outliers might wonder why. I mean, this is just a king's family. Why? But now Maitreya is saying, it's obvious why your family has so much respect from the sages, because people like you are in that family. Your family is truly worthy of the saints' respect because you, a devotee of the all-attractive, have appeared amidst their royalty. At every step, at every moment, your devotion to the all-attractive makes the flower garland of his kirtan even more fresh. To answer your manifold questions, I will recount the beautiful tales of the all-attractive. So now he's saying, I'm going to tell you the Bhagavatam, the Bhagavad Purana, to answer these questions. This Purana originates directly from the all-attractive and expands through conversations between exalted sages. You already know those details. It exists to erase the terrible sufferings of those who seek meager happiness. The inquisitive leader of the 4 child scholars once asked questions just like yours about the original supreme divinity. Wow. So I don't even remember that this part was in here. So he says the inquisitive leader of the 4 child scholars. The 4 child scholars are the Chatu Sanas, the 4 original beings created by Brahma that were just immediately really into knowledge. And they went in and found Sankarshan and asked him spiritual questions. Who is Sankarshan? Sankarshan is Ajaikapat, the deity of Purva Bhadrapada, and also Ahir Budnya, the deity of Uttara Bhadrapada. So he's the Bhadrapada deity. He's the snake that exists holding together the universe, holding up the universe, and also devouring the universe. So he exists below all the worlds, below all the realms. So these four child scholars, they journey to find this divine serpent beneath the realms of existence. And when they found him, they asked him questions. So he describes Sankarshan as the serpentine dragon who exists below the worlds with unmitigated clarity of mind. Sankarshana had focused. Sankarshana actually is a synonym for Ahir Budnya. Sankarshana, Ahir Budnya. Sankarshana had focused all his powerful attention upon the one revered by the name Vasudeva, and his eyes were closed in a direct inner vision. But to help the wise boy, the leader of the four children actually only went there, not all four of them. So I think that's Sanat. So the one of the four boys went to him, and to help him, he broke his meditation and opened his lotus eyelids ever so slowly. The boy, his hair still wet from the journey through heaven's river. So this is also one mystical thing about Ganges, is that the people who know how to do transplanar travel, I guess we'll call it, do it through the rivers, the sacred rivers. And so the way that this one Kumara got to below the realms, to Sankarshan's realm, is through the Ganga, the Ganges River. And so it says he was still wet. He had just arrived. The boy's hair still wet from the journey through heaven's river put his head lightly upon the treasure of Sankarshan's feet, which the Serpent King's daughters worship with so many gifts in hope of getting good husbands. Bathed in the light radiating, by the way, Sankarshan is the extension of Shiva. And this is where that custom comes from, of worshipping Shiva to get a decent husband. Bathed in the light radiating from the brilliant jewels in the thousands of crowns on Sankarshan's thousands of hoods. Sankarshan is his dragon, so he has serpentine heads, but he has thousands of them. Tiamat only has 5. Sankarshan has thousands. And they're all bedecked with jewels that shine because he's below the realms. There's no stars, suns, or anything there. So he's creating the light there by the shining jewels. So bathed in that light, the boy sang rhythmic poem after rhythmic poem full of truth about the pastimes of Vasudev's son with deep emotion. Then the great devotee Sankarshan fully answered the renunciate boy's questions. Later, that boy, Sanat Kumar, recounted the answers when he was asked very similar questions by the very dedicated Sankyayana. So some other sage named Sankyayana came and asked some intense questions to Sanat Kumara at one point, and that's how people know that Sanat Kumara went and met Sankarshan, because that's when Sanat Kumar told somebody and answered this person's answered Sankyayana's questions, with reference to that conversation. Sankyayana, among the greatest of all the Swan-like spiritualists, was eager to explain this information about the glories of the all-attractive to his dedicated student, my own guru, Parashara. An astrologically related name, Parashara. So Parashara is the student of Sankyayana, and Sankyayana became the student of Sanat Kumar, and Sanat Kumar was a student of Sankarshan, the deity of Uttarabhadra. All right? And then Parashara's student is Maitreya. Maitreya is Parashara's student. And while he was learning, he was co-studying with Brihaspati. Brihaspati and Maitreya were studying together from Parashara. It appears. He just says Brihaspati also heard it. I imagine that it means at that same stage. Kind-hearted Parashara fulfilled the blessings of Pulastya by explaining to me that foremost Purana, the beautiful tales of the all-attractive. Dear boy, you are very submissive and have eternal confidence in the value of such things, so I will now explain all of it to you. So, like, wow. Right? Like if I was about to tell you something and then I said, I heard this from, see, originally JFK told this to Marilyn Monroe, and then Marilyn Monroe told this to her best friend, Susie Pancakes. And Susie Pancakes was questioned by this interviewer, Don Johnson, who then explained it to my dad. And then my dad told this to me. So here's, like, you'd be like, whoa, this is some serious information. So that's what's going on. He's giving Vidura intense shraddha, or interest in the information, by explaining the integrity or validity of it and its origin. Okay, so now here is the information that's Shankarshan explained to Sanat Kumar. So you might be wondering, how could anybody know what happened to Brahma and also what was before Brahma if Brahma is the original created being? It's because there's other beings that exist while Brahma doesn't exist, such as Sankarshan. And Sanat Kumar got this information from Sankarshan. So this is what Sanat Kumar learned. When all the world is dissolved in water, he alone remains, reclining on the bed of the great serpent, Sankarshan, closing his eyes almost all the way to sleep, enjoying the bliss within himself and unconcerned with anything else. From his place within the waters, he had called forth the potent fatality of time, dissolving the tangible forms of everything and investing their subtle potential energy within his own form, like fire is compacted as potential energy within wood. So it's a nice analogy here. The universe, it gets taken apart by time and brought back to a potential state and then subsumed within this being who lies on Sankarshan. Just in the same way that fire gets potentially held within wood and then can later be extracted from it. The sunlight hitting the wood allows the wood to contain fire. For 1,000 cycles of 4 ages, he dreamt in the water, interacting only with his internal energy. So it's a very long time, 1,000 cycles of 4 ages, that there's nothing at all manifest externally in any material sense. There's only Vishnu's internal reality. Eventually, he saw that the mechanism of destiny, which moves by the force of eternal time, this is important. So time is a potency of Vishnu that's acting all the time. And so even when there's dissolution, time is still acting, and therefore it eventually also brings the dissolution to a close. And when Vishnu sees that that's happening, he takes appropriate action. So it says here, for 1,000 cycles of 4 ages, he dreamt in the water, interacting only with his internal energy. Eventually, he saw that the mechanism of destiny, which moves by the force of eternal time, that's karma moving by the force of Kala, had darkened the effulgence of the beings suspended within his body. So when all these beings are just converted into their latent essence, they're full of energy and bright. And then he subsumes them within himself. And then after this great span of time, they start to get dull because of their inactivity. The sleep becomes so deep, they get cold, they get dull. So when he sees that they're getting dark, he says, well, it's time to wake them up. So then he turns his attentive glance fully upon the needs of those subtle energies within himself, who had again become clouded with subtle desires. So this is also explaining why they're dark. And this is a little different this is more information than what I just said. So when they're hot, when living entities are hot, it's because they have a lot of desires, and then when they're cold, it's when they have no desires. So what happens after a long span of a universe existing is that the vast majority of the living entities in it get tired of it. It's like you get tired with the game after a while, or you get tired with the relationship, or you get tired with the place where you live. Even when you love it, it just gets boring after a while. So the living entities gradually exhaust their desires, but they just come to like a suicidal place where they just like, I don't have any desires. I don't want to do anything. And that's what makes them dim. That's when the universe starts to fall apart. And Vishnu takes him within himself. And actually, but what it's saying here is they become bright when they're inside him because he could see them directly. But then, and they become dim after some time by the force of karma. That means their karma starts to wake up again, and that puts a cloud over them again. It puts a cloud over them again, so you can't. The living entities aren't directly being themselves simple existence. They're getting clouded by desires to do things. And when he sees that, he puts his attention on their needs. So he's going to create an external world to facilitate their needs, their desires. So that's what this sentence is, right? Why does he specifically dwell in water? I don't really know. It's not like it's water. It's not like H2O. Because H2O is one of the evolutes. It's something that the sages describe as water, but it's not water. And it has to do with because water is solvent and a solution and a thing in which other things happen. I think that's why it's described as water. And also because water is not really a place where the people who are hearing this tale can stand. We can't really stand on water. So it's another good way to explain to us what it is. It's not a place in which we could exist. It's like a place of potential and possibility in which the things which need to combine, it's the womb type of place from which everything comes. And also the nature of the universe at that time is simply introspective. It's simply introspective. Vishnu, when it's only water, Vishnu is only introspecting. It's also interesting if you know about water as an element in astrology. Okay, so he turned his attentive glance fully upon the needs of those subtle entities within himself who had again become clouded with subtle desires. For their sake, he sent time into the qualities of material nature and generated a sprout from his navel. The sprout quickly grew into a lotus bud, thoroughly fertilized by time and destiny. Being born from Vishnu, the luster of that lotus bud illuminated the vast waters like the sun. So bam, all of a sudden there's light in this darkness. In the sleepy room, the light got turned on. Vishnu sent all the qualities of nature into that universal lotus, and the one who is known as the self-born creator, the wisdom made came into being. So we'll stop there. Tomorrow we're going to hear what happens with Brahma when he wakes up. So do you understand that? What Maitreya explained, what Sankarshan explained to Sanatkumar, is that when the living entities, when their desires get worn out, they go to sleep. The universe dissolves and they return, they are withdrawn into Vishnu and they sleep there. And as they sleep, they don't have desires, they shine pretty brightly. But after a long time, when everybody is simply pensive and non-active, after a long, long time, they start to want to wake up again. Their desires become activated again. They seem interesting again. And as that happens, the consciousness becomes clouded. It becomes unhappy just being what it is. It wants to become something else or get something else. And so to help that, Vishnu puts his attention outward to give them a chance to do what they want to do. So he what does it say then? Yeah. He sends time into material nature. Or actually, he's taking he's sending the entities back out from himself, along with their karmas, and then he sprouts a lotus to get the first being created from his womb, from his navel. He sprouts a lotus. That lotus is brilliant and lights up the universe. or whatever, the cosmos. And then on the top of that, the self-born creator, the wisdom-made being, comes into being. Yeah, this is great stuff. So from here, we're going to hear about Brahma, his day one, when and how he was born and everything. All right, my friends, thank you for your attention and your company. I'll see you tomorrow.